Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. I'm coming at you live from our nation's capital on this Saturday morning, April 12th. Historic day. This was the day the Titanic went down in 1912. So looks like the Carney ship is going down too. So we're watching that carefully. My guest this morning, I don't see him waiting in the blue room or the green room yet. The blue room if he doesn't show up. As Dan McTeague, former member of parliament for Scarborough and a dear friend for many, many years. I knew Dan when I worked in the Hill, and he was a member of parliament, a liberal member of parliament, a common sense liberal. And he's still a common sense individual. I don't know if he still is a liberal. I never asked, but he's supporting a conservative in this election campaign. And so I'm coming back very shortly with Dan McTeague and with lots of information for you. Thank you for watching today.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, thank you so much for watching today. And of course, what's the big news? The untold story here is, of course, the fact. I'm just making sure we got it. No. It's the fact that the Ingersoll plant, the GM Ingersoll plant in Ontario, is laying off 500 jobs. Now, why do you think that is? Now, there are some politicians out there who insist this has something to do with the Trump tariffs. Very interesting to note. Doug Ford doesn't say that. And of course, Dan McTeague tweeted that this is a sign of the times because nobody's buying electric vehicles. That's what's going on here. And it's positively frightening what's going on. And why do you think Doug Ford had an early election call? Because Doug Ford was heavily invested in electric vehicle plants. He was in Justin Trudeau's pocket all the way. Let's go back and watch the original announcement here.
Months ago, we announced investments to retool the CAMI EV assembly plant here in Ingersoll. Then GM began working to get CAMI ready for electric vehicle production. And today, as Mark pointed out, in record time, we're opening the first full-scale commercial electric vehicle plant in Canada.
Yeah, and that is precisely where things were when Justin Trudeau announced the opening of this plant. But of course, what does this remind you of? And it reminds me of Soviet 5-year plans that are based on nothing more than speculation where the economy is going to be. And Dan will be joining us quite soon here. Let's have a look at this. I really, really like this. Now that is like the graveyard of electric vehicles. Did we see this coming? Of course we did. But Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford insisted we spend billions of dollars. Not invest. That's not an investment. It's like investing in the Brooklyn Bridge that you don't own. This is an incredibly foolish venture by the provincial government of Ontario and the federal government of Justin Trudeau. They lauded this as a great thing, as something that was just a remedy for the economy, a remedy for climate change. And of course, once you mix climate change with the economy, it never works. It never fits together like the way these liberals always insist it does. So it's not the tariff that's causing this problem. It's lack of interest in electric vehicles. That's what's creating the crisis here. And I know there are certain politicians, some even on the right of the spectrum, who are insisting this 500 worker layoff is all a direct result of Donald Trump. Well, so's the common cold. No, it's a direct result of the bust in the market for electric vehicles. And that, my friend, is a complete fact. Now, while we're still waiting for Dan to join us here, I do want to comment on something before we get back to electric vehicles. Can you guess what that might be? Well, Pierre Poilievre disappointed me yesterday, and I can't say I'm surprised. I can't say I'm shocked, because I expected this. And every election, of course, the Liberals try to suggest the Conservatives are going to ban all abortions. Well, of course, the Conservatives have never suggested that, going back to Brian Mulroney, who tried to establish an abortion law when the Supreme Court of Canada struck down the existing abortion law in 1988, leaving us with no abortion law since 1988. How many years ago was that? I'm sorry. That's like 37 years now with no abortion law. Canada has abortion on demand, unrestricted abortion on demand. And we've had that for 37 years. Now, Pierre Poilievre yesterday said he would not reopen the abortion issue, meaning we're not going to have an abortion law. Even the most liberal countries in Europe have an abortion law. I'm sorry I'm bringing this up today, but I have to, because it's outrageous that Canada has no abortion law at all, unrestricted abortion on demand. No other country in the world has or civilized country in the world has a policy like that. Only Canada. And I'm looking forward to the day when a conservative leader, hopefully it's Pierre Poilievre, can stand up and say, yes, Canada needs an abortion law. No, we're not going to ban abortions. As much as I'd like that, I know it's not politically feasible. However, I think it's entirely politically feasible to stop funding abortions with public money. That's something a lot of people would agree with across the spectrum. And I think it's also possible to restrict abortion to at least some degree, so it doesn't become infanticide. And that's precisely what we're dealing with in many instances. So let's have a look at this. How much money was squandered on electric vehicles? And this is truly shocking. $42.646 billion. $42.646 billion. Manufacturing subsidies for EV and battery products for Canada. You know, every time this money is spent, the government that's announcing it likes to talk about it being an investment. And I see Dan is here. All right, without further ado, Dan, thank you for joining me.
Good to be here, David. Sorry about that.
Better late than never. I'm just so glad to have you here. So I was just talking about the Ingersoll layoffs, and I'm sure it's going to be a closing before long. It's very optimistic to say this is all going to be rectified in a couple of months. But as I was explaining, there's some politicians out there who are suggesting this is all a result of nasty, evil Donald Trump's tariffs. And I think you say otherwise. I say otherwise. And I want to play a clip from Doug Ford, And I was absolutely dumbstruck by this, Dan, because Doug Ford has a problem telling the truth many times, and he had this early election, I believe, because he knew economic hardship was right around the corner, and he probably would have lost an election 3 or 4 months later. But listen to Doug Ford. He says it's not the tariff.
I'm the president of General Motors that I spoke to. It's going to be about 500 employees. It has nothing to do with the tariffs, he said. The volume is not there. People are not purchasing like they thought they would. So they have thousands of vehicles sitting there. We're going to make sure we support the workers and make sure that we get government, especially Canada Post, to pick up some of these vehicles because that's what it's geared for.
Absolutely astounding. I mean, what can you say to that?
Well, on the 22nd of March, after having gone to the Ingersoll plant, I just tweeted it a little while ago. I actually went there, filmed what was there in inventory. There were thousands of these vehicles just sitting there doing nothing. Obviously, Doug Ford didn't get it. And on the 22nd of March, I said, it says a lot about why at Ford Nation is giddy supporting Carney. He's committed billions in borrowed EV and battery manufacturing like this one in Ingersoll, where the provincial and feds kicked in over $500 million for Bright Drop. Was supposed to sell 100,000 units, only sold 2,100. Actually, I got wrong. It was 2,500. They might have probably given a few away there. But look, this is anticipating what was there. It's pretty obvious. I mean, I don't just predict gas prices. I have a pretty good idea where these policies are going. When it comes to EV mandates, the entire net zero infrastructure is going to collapse. One, EV mandates are toast. That's not just because Trump got rid of them when he came in as president. We also know that the Carney government had to kill the carbon taxes. Now, why aren't they killing emissions caps? Why are they not? Why are they doubling down on forcing us to have California-style appliances, which is extraordinarily costly to consumers? There's 1,000 of these things that are coming out. GFANZ, the the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero that Mark Carney put forward is now subject to antitrust review in the United States. This guy could be charged and billions of dollars taken away from the GFANZ organization and the banks who fled. So by any measure, anybody who hopped on the bandwagon a few years ago on net zero is now looking pretty damn foolish. And it's amazing to see so many stunned Canadians falling in for this. You just lost 500 jobs. They've nuked those jobs. They're not there anymore. Now, what I do know, it was part of the reason I went down there. Mark Carney went over to France, and guess what he did, David? He decided that it would be a good idea to maybe talk to the French president Macron about buying some of those Rafale Dassault military fighters, kick out the F-35 planes, the jets that we were committed to buying, spend 10, 15 billion bucks on these jets, and get France to buy maybe $5 billion worth of military vehicles, which are going to be built at places like Bright Drop, perhaps, or maybe even the half-built or even not yet built Northvolt battery plant, the other bankruptcy that's occurred. So, however you slice it, the Liberals have had 10 years of failed policies. Net zero has laid an egg. It's not doing anything. And what they're going to try to do is use a lot more public money and hopefully put enough wool over everyone's eyes so that we continue to go down this road of more recklessness as a result of what we've seen on EVs. For Doug Ford to have signed on this, I mean, shame on him, but it probably explains why he doesn't want to support Pierre Poilievre. It says a lot about, forget what Corey Tonight and the dispute between, or the anger, or the animosity between Ford and Pierre Poilievre. This is about Pierre Poilievre saying, your policies are garbage. They've hurt Canadians. They've undermined the financial feasibility and sustainability of the federal government and the provincial government. And we're going to get rid of them, just like we're going to get rid of the CBC. And so for those reasons, you can see why people are not supporting Pierre Poilievre, because they know, they know which side of the bread is going to get buttered. And for guys like Doug Ford, bad mistake, backed the wrong horse, and now we're holding the bag. That's why I call the election early, in my view.
Yeah, exactly. What I find almost humorous about this is that Doug Ford came into office like a decade ago now on a anti-green energy policy. I don't know. People forget this. He came in and he started saying, hey, Ontario's got the highest hydro rates in the world. We've got to do something about this. And green energy is not going to work. We can't run a modern industrialized province like Ontario on windmills and solar panels. So one of the first things he did was to come out against the green energy plan. Now, of course, he's been in Trudeau's pocket for much of the last decade. He's been in the Liberal Party's pocket on this green energy program, on net zero, on electric vehicles. But you know what that strikes me as, Dan? I was thinking this morning, it's like the Soviet Union's old 5-year plans. They were based on ideology. And the economy was supposed to bend towards the ideology. So, of course, Stalin says we're going to collectivize farms because that's what Karl Marx says works. And of course, it didn't work. It created famine and millions of people died in the process because ideology cannot trump reality. And this is exactly as I see it was happening with these electric vehicles. It had to work because net zero has to work, because electric vehicles have to work, because the gas powered engine is on the verge of extinction. So it has to work. And of course, none of this added up at all. And I think this is a scandal. And I can't believe there's not more outrage out there, because we have spent, as I just showed a minute ago, we have spent $42.6 billion in subsidizing the electric vehicle industry. This is a scandal. And I can't believe there's not more people up in arms about this right now. But, as you say, they're never wrong about this. It's a temporary setback. And I think they're running fast and scared right now because this is going to get worse, not better.
Well, Linamar is going down too. Linamar is supposed to build an EV battery, didn't produce one single unit, and they've just, basically burned through $1.1 billion of your money and mine in order to build something that can't be done. This is Fantasyland 101. And if Canadians can't get their head out of the sand and realize that they're being duped, that they can't afford, the saddling of the debts that these things are incurring for generations to come, and they think that somehow, crapping on pipelines or putting emission caps that won't allow us to make any more oil or gas to send these pipelines that they now suddenly have discovered are important. If we don't wake up real soon, in the next 2 weeks, I can say confidently, the next 4 years I'm going to be spending is basically tut-tutting people saying, I warned you, but you decided that it was probably better to be worried about Orange Man bad south of the border rather than considering the absolute weakness that you all acknowledged just a few months ago under Justin Trudeau. Nothing has changed. If anything, Mr. Carney and his company, as we well know, has lied on so many fronts. And here's the big one that I'm going to say it here now because I've said it many places before, but to be absolutely clear, you're going to get a carbon tax. And that 20 cents you think you're getting off, it's going to be 40 cents by 2030, likely by the end of another government, should they form a majority government. So look, folks, if you've maxed out your credit cards, you can't pay your utilities, some of the people have to go to food banks, you don't have a job, your kids certainly don't have one, and the future looks extraordinarily bleak with a $1.3 trillion debt, accumulating $62 billion every year in deficits. Those are things that would have caused Liberals and Conservatives' hairs to curl in years past. But now, of course, it's no big deal. And I see these people who have good pensions and self-directed pensions. And, we're not worried about it. We just don't like Donald Trump, and we think Pierre Poilievre's like him. Give your head a shake. Because you know what? I'm going to spend a lot of time over the next few years pointing back to the stupidity and frivolity of people. And make no mistake, David, these people know what they're doing. They're just trying to be cool and trendy because they made mistakes in 2015, 2019, and again in 2021. And they want to somehow think that they can justify bad decisions. Well, it's coming at the expense of the country, coming at the expense of our economic sustainability. It's likely coming at the expense of what concerns me even more so, the future of the federation of this country.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, Mark Carney, of course, has been talking out of both sides of his mouth on net zero and pipelines. When he's in Alberta, he's amenable to pipelines. Maybe net zero wasn't such a great idea. When he's up back in Ontario, no way we're going to go for pipelines, and no way is net zero going to be gone. He hasn't eliminated the consumer carbon tax. He's reduced it to zero for the election, so it could be reignited again at any time. He's promised a corporate carbon tax, and he's also talking about something called a carbon tariff, which is even more ominous because it could potentially drive everybody, all the corporations out of Canada, because they don't have to pay a carbon tariff south of the border. and they don't have to pay a corporate carbon tax out of the border. So is Carney playing games with us here?
Well, let's understand and break that down a little bit. Yes, he's playing games with people, but this is a guy that's basically come around and to come up with great ideas as to how to cartelize the financial industry to try to choke off oil and gas. It's great in Canada because we'd like to bend over and we take these things because we can always find some kind of cool argument. But the United States doesn't take it that way. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Carney and G fans are subject now to what is likely to be a significant hit in terms of antitrust. And they took on the Rockefellers. They've taken on the Cargills. They've taken on the big grocery dominant players back in the 1930s, the 1890s, and very recently IBM and others. So the reality is that at the end of this, it's going to be very embarrassing for Mr. Carney and for Liberals to have gone along with this idea that somehow we can wish these things away. And I think for Mark Carney's policies, it's one thing in one region of the country, it's another thing in another region of the country. But the reality is that for the Liberals, my old party, they're campaigning against what they did over the past 10 years, and they're plagiarizing. They're actually borrowing ideas from the Conservatives. So, I've taken the position very, very clearly, David. I'm not fooling around with these guys. They no longer represent the Liberal of the center, the consensus builder, the pragmatic party that they once were under Pearson, that they were under Krayden, that they were under Martin. I'm not taking the view that it's time for the last party at the center to do well. And that's why I'm knocking on doors for the Conservatives in this election, because I want to confront Canadians with their stupidity and their willingness to think, well, everything's just fine. It's not fine. It's not good for our kids. It's not good for our grandchildren. And if you elect an international fellow who doesn't pay taxes in this country, whose first act was to lie about the fact that he had pushed Brookfield to the United States, who has a lot to account for in the fact that he doesn't, he had no business in telling us that he did the 1998 budget, that he balanced it, that he had nothing to do with claiming that there was no recession in 2008 when in fact there was. And for that, Canada escaped somewhat because of the work of Paul Martin, David Dodge, and Jim Flaherty. All of these things have a cumulative effect. And if Canadians want to sit back and go, oh, it's nice, the same way that Canadians voted for socks, sobbing, and selfies, if Canadians are that gullible and that impressionable and that easily duped, well, then it won't be hard for Mark Carney and the Liberals to pick their pockets further in the days to come, because make no mistake, everything that they say they're getting rid of, they're actually going to reapply. And you mentioned at the outset, that carbon tax is coming back sure as the day is bright. The sun, rises in the east and settles in the west. And anybody who doesn't believe that only has to look at the fact that they kept the bureaucracy. It's still there. They haven't changed the legislation or plan to implement any changes to that legislation. To say a couple of things here and there. Everything about Mark Carney is a contradiction, and people are going to learn about that right after the election, especially when he has to declare his assets and where they find the massive conflicts of interest, not just his alliances with what's happening in Beijing and the Chinese government, but also his apparent conflicts when it comes to things like tariffs. He said there'd be no more tariff war. There's a huge tariff war, and we're one of the few that are singled out.
That's very true. And of course, this electric vehicle fiasco is a double loss. And a lot of people aren't even aware of this, because we put tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to protect our dying industry, which of course was another bit of insanity.
Yeah.
But as a result, China has imposed 100% tariff on canola oil, which is basically the cash crop of most of Western farmers. When all else fails, they can make some money off canola oil. It's basically the equivalent today of cotton or tobacco. You can't eat it, but it's very essential to making a living as a farmer. And this, of course, China's punishing us for this. I just want to show you this short clip from a Canadian farmer. He's putting up his arms and saying, "Why are we protecting electric vehicles that nobody wants to buy so I can't sell my canola?"
So I thought I'd share a little bit of farmer math today. This is a 5,000 bushel bin of canola that I harvested last fall. Now, at current values at the elevator right now, this bin is worth $62,500. You're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of money, right? The problem is that on my farm, the cost of production on this bin of canola was $65,000.
The market has basically, and that's where Canadian farmers are. And of course, Mark Carney doesn't give a damn about those Canadian farmers who are going to be losing money. And some of them will go bankrupt as a result of this. But Mark Carney, of course, is afraid to do anything that's going to be an affront to China. And he's not going to complain about this 100% tariff on canola oil or anything else. But, this is really what it comes down to for me this morning, Dan, is that why? And I ask you this as a former Liberal MP who saw many Liberal leaders. You've worked with many Liberal leaders over the year. Mark Carney came from nowhere. We kept talking. We were talking about him for years. Mark Carney's coming. Mark Carney's coming, like it was the second coming or something. But why is this man caught on with Canadians? We know he's deep in the pocket of China. He said many times he wants the Chinese yuan to replace the US dollar as the global currency. He wants China to replace the United States as the global engine of economic movement. We know he sought and received a $276 million loan from the Central Chinese Bank while he was in Beijing, ostensibly supposed to be representing the Prime Minister's office. WeChat supported him during his Liberal leadership campaign and continued to do so during the federal election. He stood behind Paul Chang, a guy who wanted to deliver his conservative opponent to the Chinese consulate for a bounty. And what strikes me, and of course, yes, and the tax evasion issue. Even CBC, Radio Canada, CTV have been reporting extensively on Mark Carney putting his profits from Brookfield Assets Management in the Cayman Islands now and in Bermuda. Billions of dollars of tax evasion. Mark Carney was sold to Canadians as a man of integrity. This was the man who was going to bring sense back to the Liberal Party after 10 years of a manic depressive like Justin Trudeau, who nobody was taking seriously anymore. And you could take Mark Carney seriously. This was a banker, after all, a man of integrity. And the more this guy stays around and the more we dig, we find out he lacks any integrity. He's on the take. He will do whatever he needs to do. As he says, he understands the real world. I mean, these poor underlings out there don't get that. But he understands how the world works. And he will exploit that understanding. So I don't see much integrity in this guy. It's almost surreal to me. Why is Mark Carney continuing to exhibit Teflon on his body?
David, good question. I mean, you did the interview with Liz Truss some time ago, saying about the ruinous efforts that he had made as bank governor in ruining and creating hyperinflation, which is almost uncontrollable in the UK. But I think for this point, it really speaks to the depth to which the Liberal Party has controlled the media and pollsters and influencers. Let me explain. Media receives substantial benefits directly and indirectly from the federal government's CRTC moves to prevent some from having to pay their CRTC dividends. Others are getting money directly. And I don't just mean the CBC. We also know that pollsters, all of them, without exception, and I can't think of many that don't. Apart from having strong Liberal ties, which I know about, for instance, one of them, Main Street, is Keto Maggie. Yep. This guy was my campaign manager in 2008. These people bleed Liberal Party in red. But beyond that, how much have they received in contracts, generous, inside contracts for various ministries? There's 30 some odd, for surveys and for random sampling and things like that. They are, people are, I say, well, no, every one of us are sampled to death. We get calls all the time for the most ridiculous of things. And yet that has been a source of significant amounts of money, what I call, and you call, grift, has been very profound. And so, yes, Mark Carney is treated as the best since sliced bread, and Winston Churchill himself, except for when he waves these little pieces of paper around, says peace in our times, and that we have no tariff war with the United States, and we're not going to talk about China in all the ways in which you've alarmingly put out what has been happening, level of interference and the willingness to accept. All these things aside, I think have manipulated gullible Canadians, and it really comes down to the fact that if they're not intelligent enough to distinguish and to make the right decisions, then they're going to be saddled with extraordinary pain over the next few years, the likes of which we have not seen. We've got industry after industry, manufacturing that's reeling, construction that is reeling, the energy sector, which is reeling as a direct result of what this government has done. And now Canadians saying, oh, we don't like Donald Trump. Well, you don't like Donald Trump, and he's being able to slap us around, as are the Chinese, because we're weak. And not because we're not smart. We've been able to punch above our weight for decades, but we've lost that. And if Canadians don't smarten up this time, I'm afraid to say, you talked about the canola farmer earlier, I think there's some elements in this country that are ready to pack it in. And I hope that is the case. I hope I'm definitely wrong, but I've never seen anything like this before. And I've been around long enough to remember, Western alienation, the Western Canada concept, the victory at Olds Didsbury. I mean, a lot of these things, people would look at me, their eyes would roll. History is important to understand because I think the future of this country is most uncertain now.
So you think the polling might be affected by the amount of money they're getting from,
Yeah, no, and I know
would,
it is because I think there's also, if you look at one of the polls I saw last week from Nick Nanos, and I got a hold of someone who works with him, said, why are you polling 50% of the people over 60 years of age? I know I'm in that category, but and I have the gray hair to prove it, but we don't represent the majority of Canadians. It's the under 60 that do, and they're not voting Liberal. So why that? So there was a slight tweaking in the poll, and guess what? It showed the Conservatives moving up, the Liberals moving down as a result of that. I think the next 2 weeks are really the point which people are going to spend a lot of time looking at the facts, and it's not boding well for Mr. Carney. He can't use the Trump issue anymore. The Liberals can't use the Trump issue anymore. What we can use is what happened in Ingersoll, Ontario, which I predicted a month ago with the closure of the Bright Drop. All this public money has been, fire and smoke have been blown to pieces. You as Canadians, we as Canadians have given money to these people so they could invest in stupidity, which has now created a situation where not only do we have massive deficits, we got nothing to show for it. And we no longer have an viable automotive sector in Ontario. Thanks, Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney. Looks like working together has worked very much decidedly against the interests of Canadians, both short-term and long-term.
Yeah, exactly. So do you see this election breaking over the next, we've got 2 weeks and a day precisely until April 28th. Do you see this breaking towards the Conservatives and Poilievre over this time period?
Not with the pollsters, but I'm seeing on the street. I'm knocking on doors. It's a great feeling. In fact, I'm going up today to help one candidate. For anybody who's in Hamilton and Wentworth, you'll see me. I'll be knocking at the doors with Erica Alexander, the granddaughter of the great Lincoln Alexander. And I'm getting a very different reading from the ground in Liberal polls. People aren't bamboozled; they're not swayed, and they can't change their mind of what they've seen in the past 10 years, based on what's happened in the past 3 weeks. So, I think there's one of the most interesting things that has Liberals nervous, and I've spoken to a couple of them. They don't like talking to me all the time now like they used to because they know I'm not supporting the Liberals in any way, shape, or form because they're not the Liberals. What they're nervous at, the Conservative vote is committed. And for people like Chantal Hébert to go say, well, Trudeau had these rallies with 10, 15,000 people in 1979. Hey, Chantal, unlike you, when we went to my school, high school, I was actually there. And there wasn't 20,000 people there. And in fact, we came damn close to winning that election anyways. But at the end of the day, you only had one event. You didn't have 10 or 15 events where you pulled that many people, even if it was 10 or 15,000. Poilievre has a very strong backing. And this time, the Conservative vote is actually coming out, and that's got to make the Liberals very, very nervous, notwithstanding the fact that the New Democrats can't stay dead forever. Some of those NDP hardliners, especially the workers up in places like Sault Ste. Marie and Kenora and other places like that, are eventually going to go back to their own and realize, there's no point in a New Democrat, a socialist, supporting a banker. It's not going to happen.
Well, I know you're on the verge of going out right now and door knocking on behalf of the Conservative candidate there, and that's something I don't think a lot of people would have imagined. Just like I just was reading yesterday, Irwin Cotler, a former justice minister, liberal justice minister, is supporting the Conservatives at the time. And I really do think that Mark Carney was a manufactured candidate. It's a guy with absolutely no business being leader of the Liberal Party or prime minister. He was just taken, installed by globalists, by people who just don't give a damn about Canadian democracy. And now his campaign, I think, is being completely manufactured. And it just kills me because he hasn't got an original thought in his head. I mean, there's all that talk about his plagiarizing his doctorate back at Harvard. but he's stealing policies every week from Poilievre. And of course, Poilievre, if they're Poilievre's policies, they're bad. But if Carney takes them, they're good.
They're good.
And it's just incredible. And he can't deviate from the same talking points he's been using from the day one he started his Liberal leadership race. It's the same script. And it amazes me and I've talked to people who have gone to his coffee clutches and go to his so-called rallies today, and it's the same thing over and over again. And the only difference is when he says, "Hey, I think I'll take that policy from Poilievre, and I think I can use that." And so I think you're dead on. And a lot of conservatives are very depressed right now. They're thinking, "My God, the polls are terrible." Even Abacus, which is usually fairly positive, I knew David Coletto when I was with Sun News. I think he's probably the most objective pollster out there. But even his polls are not looking great. But I think you hit the nail on the head. They're talking to too many people who are over 60. And of course, that's the strongest segment of the Liberal vote. These are people who really think Poilievre is going to come in and Donald Trump them back to an age of no social security. They really believe that. And it's the young people who can't afford a house, who can't even afford rent in any Canadian city. Some of them are homeless, and they can't even imagine a day coming when they can own their own home and start a family. Those are the ones who are madder than hell. And I think if anything comes out of this, that's exactly what the statement is that it's the younger people who have been disenfranchised by Justin Trudeau.
Big time.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, kids coming back to the parents says, "Thanks for pooching my future. You got your pension, you got your house that's paid off, you got the nice car, you got everything going for you. What about me? You've saddled me with 62 billion in annual accumulated debts and $1.3 trillion and no future. A future in which I can't even find work because you've flooded the country with people who work for nothing." I mean, on so many fronts, David. The country has fallen. The country is skidding towards an abysmal outcome. I mean, the lowest GDP numbers, productivity in the world. I mean, that's pretty significant when you've got to sort of bring your country's level of growth down to levels that we don't see even in the third world. The fact is that we're in a very, very, very difficult position, and the denialism by those who have much, while denying that to the next generation, is pretty bad. My parents didn't do that to me. Their parents didn't do that to them. But this generation, selfishly, to a large extent, is doing it to them. And I'm not referring to everybody who's a boomer, but I'm saying boomers have a lot to account for because they've done a terrible thing by their very bad choices. Wokeness does not work in Canada. Practicality does, reality does. And it's time for them to wake up before it's too late and do at least something for the next generation. Because right now, the way it's going, there won't be much of a Canada left economically to be able to survive over the next decade or two.
Well, Dan, if there was ever an MP who defined and embodied integrity, it was you. You always put principle ahead of expediency above what would have been easy. You often took the hard road. And I admire you for that. I always have. And that's why I consider you a good friend. I've known you from your days in the House of Commons when I labored there as a staffer. And it is so refreshing to hear your honesty and your frankness at this stage, at this hour in this country's history. And I think we need to hear more of you. This is why you're always welcome in this show. It's always a pleasure to greet you. I know you're anxious to get out and start knocking doors. So thank you for joining me, Dan. We love you here.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you again soon. So you get out there and knock on some doors. Bye for now.
Take care.
That was Dan McTeague, former Liberal MP from Scarborough, and a very dear friend over the years. One of the politicians I've admired because he stood by principle when it was much easier to jettison principles. He did that on a lot of issues over the years. He continues to stand by principle today. And I tell you, I wish more politicians had that courage and that ability to speak the truth to power the way Dan does. I'll be back with some closing remarks in a minute. Yes, I do agree with Dan on one. Well, I agree with everything Dan said, but mostly I agree with the fact this election has been manufactured for the Liberals by Liberals in the media and in polling. And I think this election is going to break towards the Conservatives. Now, they can't get overconfident. They got to keep playing the game. They've got to keep doing this properly. They've got to keep focused on change, change, change. But it can break for them, especially if Carney participates in the English language debate. Poilievre will absolutely eviscerate him there. I'll be back again tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Thanks for joining me a bit early today. And I will give you all the news you need to know. Let's continue to resolve to resist. So God bless and Godspeed. I'm David Krayden.